If you've ever seen this man, you may be cursed. So around 2009, a man by the name of Jacob Fairchild was doing a human experiment in an old insane asylum. The experiment was to see if the subjects could stay awake for an entire month playing a computer game that he designed. But the people that were doing this experiment were not heard from afterwards. Jacob was apparently losing his mind while conducting this experiment. He started wearing a mask covered in eyes, calling himself the Timekeeper. This is an image that a former staff member had drawn of him. Eventually, legend has it, he went so crazy he locked everyone inside the facility and burned it down, killing everyone, including himself. But as the place was burning down, he threw himself over a computer server that had the game on it, and it was the only thing not damaged by the fire. Recently, it's been reported that the game Jacob created has been randomly resurfacing on people's computers. To this day, 2 of the teens that reported playing the game have died, 3 have gone missing, and 1 reported seeing this person upon starting the game. And no one who has ever played the game has won. This was the last photo ever taken on Chelsea McPherson's camera before she went missing. So just outside of Seattle in 2004, high school junior Chelsea McPherson's teachers noticed something was wrong with her. For one, it appeared like she just entirely stopped sleeping. She apparently mentioned to a friend that every time she fell asleep, she said that she saw the image of a clown that she referred to as Mr. Bubbles. Her English teacher also reported that she was constantly looking outside of the classroom window as if something was out there watching her. Police evidence gathered after her disappearance showed that her notebooks were full of sketches like this with what police now believe to be Mr. Bubbles. October 4th, 2004 was the last night anyone saw Chelsea. The last text sent from her phone was to her friend saying, "I'm tired of being afraid." And now, there's something scary about this photo. Once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. So this is a bunch of linen workers in Ireland around the year 1900. And everything looks normal until you realize that there's a hand not attached to a person crawling over the shoulder of this woman. Let me know in the comments if you saw it right away. So more and more sightings of the Smiling Man have been reported recently. For those who don't know, the Smiling Man is a very tall, odd-looking man who wears this creepy grin and is often caught trying to steal children, as was the case with a young girl named Linda. Years ago, Linda lived in West Virginia, and one night she awoke to strange sounds in her bedroom. She rolled over to go back to sleep, but what she saw in her hallway was a tall, dark, shadowy figure. Linda closed her eyes in fear, and when she reopened them, he was standing right above her. She screamed and he disappeared, but recently there's been more reports of sightings. Legend has it, if you close your eyes at night and think the words "Smiling Man, Smiling Man, Smiling Man" over and over again, he'll appear. Would you try? The story of Jean Dulac and his evil doll. So in the early 1900s, Jean Dulac was one of the most famous ventriloquists in all of vaudeville. His doll not only looked like it was speaking on its own, but it appeared to move on its own and also had a voice completely different from Jean's. This confused a lot of his fans, but they mostly chalked it up to his talent. But others felt there was something slightly sinister about the doll. Reports that the doll was sometimes caught speaking even when it wasn't on Jean's hand. Missy Waters, a vaudevillian dancer and Jean's lover, claimed that one night she walked into Jean's room to find the doll off of his hand and Jean on the other side of the room curled up in a ball crying. She said a voice was coming from the doll speaking Latin, and it clearly was not Jean. The more Jean used the doll, the sicker he got too, and within a few years of his success, he was on his deathbed. And apparently, right before he died, he asked to make a call to Missy. According to her, on that phone call, Jean said it was the devil inside of the doll. He said that he had bought the doll off a man traveling through town with the understanding that if he let the devil live inside the doll, he would have all the fame and fortune he desired. His last words were, "Do not let anyone have this doll after I die." The whereabouts of the doll are currently unknown. In 1912, a young boy went missing. And when he was finally reunited with his mother, it seemed like it was not the same boy. So 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar disappeared by a lake on a family vacation in 1912. The only clue found was his hat, which led many to believe he had been kidnapped. The next year, in 1913, a man is seen traveling with a boy that looks very similar to Bobby. He was arrested, but he insisted the boy was not Bobby. He was a boy named Bruce Anderson. But the police didn't listen and returned the boy to Bobby Dunbar's mother. At first, the mother is not convinced the boy is Bobby Dunbar, but she claims that the boy has similar birthmarks to Bobby, so it must be the same child. But when she sends him to play with the neighborhood kids, they don't recognize Bobby either. The boy lived with the Dunbars for the rest of his life, went on to have a family of his own, and passed away in 1966. And almost 100 years after this took place, Bobby Dunbar's granddaughters insisted a DNA test be done. And it proved what they feared to be true. The boy was Bruce Anderson. He shared no DNA with the Dunbar family. It turns out part of the reason he was not reunited with his real mother was there was a rumor that Bruce Anderson's mother was a prostitute and was not viewed favorably by the police. For more creepy history, make sure you're following along. You'll never look at a mall Santa the same way after hearing this story. So this photo was taken around 1920 in a Christmas fair happening outside of Boston. The young child in this photo is Alberta Porter, the daughter of Robert Porter, who was supposed to be Boston's next mayor. Apparently, this Santa had set up around the corner from the rest of the fair and was not visible from the rest of the fair. Robert and his daughter actually didn't even see the Santa until they were walking home. The line to see Santa inside of the fair was way too long, so when Alberta saw this Santa, she started crying and begging her dad to take a photo with him. So this photo was taken, and afterwards, the Santa asked if Alberta wanted to go on a short ride on the donkey. And she starts crying and begging her father again, so he agrees. But Alberta never returned. An hour went by and Santa still hadn't brought her back. Robert ran into the fair to ask an employee how long the donkey rides typically last, but the employee seemed really confused. There was no Santa with donkey rides at this fair. The employee pointed to the Santa who had a long line of children out in front of him and said that was the only Santa at the fair. Alberta was never found, and Robert actually dropped out of politics to spend his entire life and savings on finding her and the man who took her, and never did. This is why I can't do Ring cameras. So this photo was taken at 3 a.m. on a Ring camera just outside of Spokane, Washington on March 17th, 2017. Which, as if that's not scary enough, the same man was seen photographed on 13 other Ring cameras in the area, all at 3 a.m. At first, police believed it was an attack orchestrated by a group of people, but a closer look made them realize it was the same man. One witness claimed she was awoken at 3 a.m. to what sounded like a baby crying, and that's when she got the alert that something was seen on her Ring camera. She also claimed that since this happened, she's felt like someone's been watching her. This man was never found by police, but a user on Reddit based in Chicago recently posted that she also saw something weird on her Ring camera. She said her and her neighbors all got an alert at 3 in the morning that someone wearing a mask was seen at their door. So Texas schools are starting to send parents DNA kits so that they'll be able to identify their children's bodies in emergencies. And parents are very understandably frustrated with this. For one, it kind of feels like a slap in the face after Uvalde, where nothing much was done to prevent a tragedy like that happening again. And instead of taking steps to prevent that from happening again, they're basically saying, hey, here's an ID kit so you can constantly worry about this happening to your child. Which also, a side note, but fingerprinting every child in Texas doesn't feel very individual freedom of them. Parents are also worried that this is going to bring up triggering conversations for their very young children. Mommy, why are you fingerprinting me? Well, baby, if you go to school and get blown to bits by a military-grade weapon, Mommy won't be able to see your face so good. But this way, if I'm able to recover part of your finger, I'll be able to know it's you. Oh, okay. This idea was actually cooked up in 2021 before the Uvalde tragedy, but the fact that this is a response at all is apocalyptic. You know how they say that kids can see ghosts that adults can't see? I think this video proves it. So look at this little girl. She's talking to someone who's off screen, but watch what happens. It seems like an invisible force tries to take that toy from her, and then watch again. She's still talking to something. And it appears to try to take the box from her again. And she says no. What do you think this is? This is why I don't trust clowns. So this is the only photographic evidence that we have of the night clown, or payaso de noche, a clown that terrorized southern Texas in the early 2000s. In 2002, an absurd amount of dogs went missing in Texas. Some communities said that every dog on the block was gone. So one night, this 6-year-old girl, Sarah Martinez, wanders into the woods looking for her lost dog. She was missing for hours, and when they finally found her, she was curled up in a ball crying, claiming the payaso de noche had eaten her dog. Many people in the community chalked it up to her being like a little kid with a wild imagination, but soon other kids in the area started complaining about this. This drawing was submitted by a second-grade teacher to evidence. Tons of kids started drawing pictures just like this, claiming that their dogs also had been eaten by payaso de noche. And just like Pennywise, this is not the first time that this clown had been seen. Other sightings happened just outside of Mexico City in the 90s, and more recently in San Diego, where this photo was snapped. You really need to make sure you're double-checking your house at night. This story comes from a woman named Shannon who lived in Seattle. Shannon lived alone, but for months she was complaining about weird noises coming from inside her house at night. And and sometimes she would wake up with bruises on her arms that had no explanation. Shannon would also come home from work to find things in her home were not the same as she left them. Like this one time she came home and saw sawdust all over her living room floor. So that's when she set up a camera and caught this image in her kitchen one night at midnight. Shannon was obviously terrified, so she called the police, who came to her house and tore up everything looking for clues as to who the intruder was. And that's when they found this hole behind her couch. And inside this hole was rope, tape, a lock of Shannon's hair, and a vial of her blood. Police said that it looked like someone had been living in this hole for months. Whoever this was never found, and Shannon has since moved homes, but every now and then she complains of a weird scratching noise at night. So there's actually talk now that artificial intelligence is going to get so good it will be able to design the most beautiful people on the planet. I've been using artificial intelligence for a while now, so I wanted to see if I could get it to design one of these people so you guys could see what I was talking about. I fed the bot key physical features that we typically associate with supermodels, and this is what it drew me. Bella Hadid, I think you're safe for now. But then I thought maybe my search terms were wrong, so I tried to type in something that was a little more clear for the bot, and yeah, not much better. I thought maybe it would do a better job with men or different skin tones. I think eventually these bots are going to get really good, but for right now, I think supermodels are safe. This photo is of the Cincinnati crawler. It was taken by a family who caught him in their home in 1974, but he escaped shortly afterwards. So in 1974, the Johnson family in Cincinnati noticed a couple weird things happening in their home. The 14-year-old daughter, Claire, would complain about seeing glowing eyes outside of her window at night. And then one night, the youngest son, Timmy, was laying in bed in the dark when he felt the family dog jump up onto his bed. But when he went to go pet it, it was not the dog. It was the crawler, who police still believe was responsible for the disappearance of 4 other boys in the area. Some believe that he was an escaped convict, while others actually believe that he was the victim of human experiments happening in the area that may have been conducted by the family's dad. Claire snapped this photo of him before he escaped, but he was never found since. This story keeps me up at night, and it's a real one. So in the early 90s, a woman named Jerry went to a psychotherapist named John Mack because she was having recurring nightmares of UFOs. Then one night, her 2-year-old son started screaming in terror in his room. She ran in to check on him, and he claimed that owl monsters were touching his legs. And when she asked where the owl monsters were now, he claimed that they were in a boat in the sky. So Jerry starts thinking that maybe her family is being visited by aliens. She kind of brushed it off at first, but then one night her daughter has this experience. She was practicing reading for school, and she had to time herself in 10-minute intervals and see how far she could read. So she's timing herself for 10 minutes, marking how far she read, timing herself for 10 minutes, marking, timing herself for 10 minutes, and then she looks up and an hour has gone by. There's 50 minutes of time she can't account for, which apparently is kind of common in people who have been visited by aliens. I talk more about this story and other alien encounters on my podcast this week. And we hear a story from someone whose grandfather was visited by aliens in the 60s. This is why you have to be careful who you let into your Halloween parties. So this is a photo of who police believed was a guest at a Halloween party in Rochester, New York in the 1940s. The party was being thrown by Jack and Amelia Layton, and they actually noticed that this guest was outside of the party watching the guests through a window. The report claims that Amelia believed the guest was her friend Jan, who tended to go above and beyond for Halloween, creating very scary costumes. So she let this person in believing it was her friend Jan. But then 20 minutes later, Jan shows up, and that guest could not be found anywhere. So Amelia starts running around the party asking everyone if they knew who that guest was, and no one had recognized that person. So she goes into her daughter's room, who was playing while the party was happening. And the police report states that the only thing there left of Amelia's daughter was a bloody shoe. 4 other reports of this guest being at parties that night were called into police, and all of them resulted in missing children's cases. The identity of this person has never been found, and none of the kids have been found either. Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you a sketch, then I'm going to show you the person that was arrested, and we're going to see. So this is the police sketch for the man wanted in the Delphi murder case, one of the most high-profile unsolved murders right now. For those who don't know, in 2017, 2 young girls, Abby Williams and Libby German, were murdered while out for a walk in the woods. And a few days ago, this man, Richard M. Allen, was arrested as a suspect in the murders. And Richard looks so different from that sketch that here's actually a photo of him posing next to it, completely unnoticed. A better comparison would actually be this photo that one of the girls posted to Snapchat, where she was able to get video and audio of the man before they were murdered. Details pertaining to the arrest are still under wraps, but I could definitely see how that man would be this man, more so than the police sketch. This is the dark side of trick-or-treating. Multiple sightings of this clown were reported in Denver on Halloween night, and many of the reports claim that this person was handing out candy in different neighborhoods. Now, most adults didn't let their kids get anywhere near the clown, but a few unsupervised children grabbed candy from him. Candy that was collected as evidence showed disturbing images and satanic verses on the wrappers. A few of the children that ate the candy were actually monitored in a hospital overnight and deemed okay by doctors, but a few of them have now reported an inability to sleep. And one 10-year-old boy has reported an overwhelming desire to go find this clown, who he told his parents lives in the woods behind the school. Police are now looking for any other information the Denver community might have on this person. This has to be the worst catfishing case I've ever heard. This is Austin Lee Edwards, and he was a 28-year-old Virginia cop who was pretending to be someone else online and was in a relationship with a teen girl in Riverside, California. And then last week, he drove 2,500 miles from Virginia to California to kidnap her. It's reported that he parked at her neighbor's house, got out of his car, walked over to her house where he killed her grandparents and mother and then set the house on fire. He was able to pull the teen girl out of her house and put her in his car, but he was caught a few hours later. He died in a police shootout, though the girl he took was okay. He also quit his policing job 2 weeks before he committed the crime, but his old employer said that his background check had come back completely clean. Right now, we're not sure exactly what platform he was using or what identity he was using, but be safe out there. Was Wednesday filmed in the same location as Gilmore Girls? So when I was watching Wednesday, I thought I saw some familiar locations. Mostly this gazebo and like the quaint, adorable town of Jericho looking like it's straight out of Gilmore Girls. So I did some digging and it turns out a lot of people thought the same thing. But that couldn't be farther from the truth, because most of Wednesday was actually filmed on location in Romania. This is actually Nevermore, and you can see above like where they added in all the CGI to make it this like beautiful school. Not only that, but most of it was filmed on stages in Romania, so this whole courtyard is actually just a stage. Notice you can't see the ceiling because it would just be a bunch of lights and wires. They filmed some exteriors, such as this one, but most of it was just on a stage. Tim Burton actually came out and said it was very hard to make Romania look like Vermont, but if you hadn't told me, I don't think that I would have known. What do you think? Can you tell a house is haunted just by looking at it? Today we're going through the Zillow listing of the real Conjuring house, and we're gonna see. This is an 18th century farmhouse in Rhode Island, and it was owned by the Perrin family in the 70s. When they first moved in, the mom would notice that her broom would move on its own, and things around the house would mysteriously be out of place. But things in the house quickly got way worse. The kids noticed a smell of rotten eggs everywhere, and every morning at 5:15 their beds would shake. They realized they were being haunted by the ghost of a woman who died on the property in the 1800s named Bathsheba. She was reportedly practicing witchcraft in the house. It's believed that she killed a child during a satanic ritual by sticking a needle into its head. Then we all know the story of Ed and Lorraine Warren coming to the house and getting rid of Bathsheba. But according to people who have lived in this house and visited this house, there's still definitely something haunting the place. Would you ever stay in this house? This is why rental houses terrify me. So Paula was staying at an Airbnb outside of Detroit by herself. Her job had sent her there for training. And immediately in the house, she starts feeling like something is off. There was always weird shadows outside the windows, and she would hear footsteps on the roof really late at night. She ends up locking herself outside of the rental the next day, but it's not a huge deal because the property manager actually lives in the house next to it. So she asks him about the footsteps she hears on the roof at night, and he says that they have lots of raccoons in the area, but she kind of knows that it's not a raccoon. He lets her back into the house and tells her that her keys are on the bedside table, which that's kind of weird. How did he know that? Another thing about the property manager is he's an older gentleman, so he listens to his TV on full volume like all night, and she can hear it from her house. So the next night, it's kind of the same thing. Weird shadows outside the window, creaking on the roof, and then her neighbor's insanely loud television. And Paula decides that she's had enough, so she opens her side door to go over to her neighbor's house to tell him to knock it off. And that's when she stops in her tracks. She can see his TV through the window. And on it is Paula, standing at the door, looking out the window. And then she sees him get up out of his chair, walk over to the window, and smile at her. 3 BuzzFeed Unsolved cases had groundbreaking discoveries this year. You maybe remember the story of the Lady of the Dunes. In 1974, a young woman who was out for a walk in the dunes of Cape Cod discovered the body of a woman. She wasn't able to be identified because her killer actually did things to her body so that you wouldn't be able to identify her, like removing her hand so you couldn't get fingerprints. But then this year, through DNA analysis and historical records, she was able to be identified as Ruth Marie Terry. And it turns out her husband at the time, Guy Rockwell Moldovan, was a suspect in the murder of his previous wife and stepdaughter. Then there's the case of the boy in the box, where in 1957, the body of a young boy was found wrapped in a blanket inside of a box in Philadelphia. The identity of the boy remained a mystery until this week, when through DNA analysis, he was identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Police credited advancements in DNA profiling as well as volunteer sleuths who were able to figure out who his potential relatives would have been. Police also say it'll be an uphill battle to determine who is responsible for his death, since his parents have since passed. And last, we have the Somerton man, whose death in 1948 baffled Australian police. He was an unknown man found laying against the wall on Somerton Beach with nothing on him to identify him. The tags on all of his clothes had been cut, and the autopsy came back as potential poisoning, but his identity has stumped us for decades. That is until July of this year, when he was identified as Charles Webb. It said that a DNA match from a first cousin 3 times removed was what sealed the case. Can you tell a place has a dark past just by looking at it? This is part of a series where we look at listings of homes that have tragic backstories. In June of 1996, Darlie Rudier called 911 claiming that someone had broken into this home and attacked her family. Her 2 youngest sons suffered fatal stab wounds, while she herself suffered superficial cuts and bruises as well as a deep cut on her neck. But upon arrival to the house, the cops immediately felt like the scene had been staged. And though they had this beautiful home, a quick investigation showed that the family had been in deep financial stress. Just 12 days after she had made the 911 call, Darlie was arrested for the murder of her 2 sons. She's currently on death row in Texas, but one thing has always struck me as bizarre about this case. People have assumed that the motive was to cash in on her son's life insurance policies. But the entire family was home during the attack, including her husband and other child who were upstairs. The life insurance policies of Darlie's 2 sons only totaled $10,000, while her husband's totaled $800,000. And to me, that motive just doesn't add up. This is another scary ghost story that comes from one of you guys. So Jack works for the Navy, and he has to move into naval housing on base. But there's one bedroom in the naval housing unit that Jack gets a really bad feeling from. He says it always feels like someone's in the room looking at him. So he just keeps the door closed, doesn't go in it, but then eventually he gets married and needs a bigger bedroom and has to move into this room. And weird stuff immediately starts happening. The closet starts opening by itself at night. Furniture starts moving around when he's not looking. But here's the craziest part. Jack's story isn't unique. When he starts talking to a bunch of other people in the Navy about his experience, it turns out a lot of them also feel like their homes are haunted. After some digging, I actually found out that this Navy base was built on Gunjawamp, a haunted swamp in Connecticut. I do a whole deep dive on it in my podcast, but there's something weird going on there. I think about this true crime case every year around the holidays. On Christmas Eve 1945, the Sauter family house burned down in West Virginia, and only 4 of the 9 children home that night made it out. The cops told the parents that all 5 children must have died in the fire that night, but when they did a search of the area the next day, no remains were found. Like, absolutely no evidence of the kids being in the house was found. So then fast forward a year, and the dad sees a photo in a magazine of a little girl in New York who looks identical to his daughter Betty. But then the authorities in town are like, "You're crazy, there's no way all the kids died in the fire that night." And then a little while after that, the authorities actually get in trouble for planting evidence in the rubble saying that the kids died in the fire. And then fast forward another 20 years, and the parents actually get a letter in the mail with this photo claiming to be their son Lewis, but are never able to find any more information about who this is. There's so many more twists and turns to this story, and I actually do a full breakdown in my most recent podcast episode. But if you know the case, what do you think? Did the kids really die in the fire that night? I'm going to show you another one of the craziest true crime moments ever caught on camera. So in 2011, Laura Giddings went missing at Mercer University, and closely watched this concerned classmate talk to a reporter.
No one has seen her since Saturday. I mean, the last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since.
That man is Stephen McDaniel, and he is responsible for her murder. But the craziest part is at this point, she's still missing. So watch what happens when the reporter tells him live on TV that the body was found.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
Okay.
Early that Sunday morning, he had gone into her apartment with a master key that he stole for the building and murdered her. and currently he's up for parole in 2041. One of the worst serial killers of all time is being released from prison. He goes by the name of the Serpent, and he's been linked to 20 murders of Western tourists all throughout Asia and the Middle East. Most of these attacks took place on the hippie trail, where he would lure in tourists by pretending to be a spiritual guru and then poison them. Some of his victims he would actually poison and then nurse back to health because he thought that it made them loyal to him. One time in 1976, he attempted to drug a group of 60 French students who were on holiday in New Delhi so that he could rob them. But he gave them too powerful of a dose and they all started passing out while standing up. Authorities caught on to this and he was arrested, where he was then linked to the murders of 20 other people. And he is currently being released from prison on good behavior and because of his old age. And we've seen this before with repeat killers, where they just stop killing while they're in prison and then start killing the second they get out.